Tell me you can't see smoke from the top up there. Tell me you don't see the smoke on the leaves of the tree.
And they say that half the soil on the entire island is made up of human remains. And it sounded like there was somebody standing right next to me. I just thought it was one of you guys, and it was nothing.
I don't know if it is a spirit or just some hoodlums that are trying to have some fun. What I do know is that regardless, we're not alone here. Someone else is here. 30 more minutes, yeah. We should get back. Alright.
421. During the invasions of barbarians on Italian land, the inhabitants of Padua and Este fled their homes to escape the invasion. They found refuge on a small island named Poveglia. Some decided to stay there, and within time, the island population began to grow, and in the following centuries, its importance grew also, until it became governed by dedicated civil office government representatives. However, some years later, many preferred to move to Venice, or as close as possible to it, and the island became barely inhabited. (1346) The Black Death. When the Black Death in the 1300s hit Europe, the people of the Poveglia island were moved, due to Venice being under attack from the Genoan fleet, and the island was used as dumping ground for the infected, dead, and dying. Thousands of bodies were dumped there, and thousands of sick people were just left to die on the island. Those who fought back were burned alive with the dead bodies. Even those who were barely suspected having plague symptoms were still sent to the island. The people who would transport the sick and the dead to the island were always wearing plague masks. The purpose of the mask was to keep away bad smells such as decaying bodies. They would stuff the masks with herbs while wearing them, believing that the herbs would prevent them from becoming infected. Historians speculate that 100,000 to 160,000 people were left on the island to die. After the Black Death weakened its grip on Europe, the island was abandoned. (1527) An elected lord and head of state of several Italian city-states offered the island to the Camaldolese monks, who refused the offer, ominously saying that the island has too much darkness on it. The island remained uninhabited for another 100 years. 1645. The Venetian government built 5 octagonal forts to protect and control the entrances of the lagoon. After nearly 300 years, the island was inhabited again. If you liked the video so far, please consider hitting the thumbs up button and subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. (1776) The Poveglia Island came under the jurisdiction of the Public Health Office and became a checkpoint for people coming to and going from Venice by ship. There was no more sign or mention of the decaying dead bodies of those infected by the Black Death. 1793. There were several cases of the plague on 2 ships, and consequently the island was transformed into a temporary confinement station for the ill. This role for the island became permanent in 1805, and an old bell tower was rebuilt into a lighthouse. The role of the quarantine of the island remained until 1814. (1922) The existing buildings on the Poveglia Island were converted into an asylum for the mentally ill. However, Italian citizens knew that the Poveglia Asylum was for anything but rehabilitation. Multiple sources of historical records state that the hospital was supervised by a man named Dr. Paulo. At the time, mental illness wasn't as clearly defined as today. Hence, the hospital was home to many patients with physical disabilities, mental conditions, and neurological problems. Anyone who behaved outside of the cultural norms often was associated with mental illness and often forced to go to the island. Poveglia became once again a nightmarish place. Dr. Paulo performed barbaric and torturous treatments on his patients, such as electric shocks, lobotomies, and force feeding. The asylum's living conditions were dreadful and unsanitary. The staff often neglected patients for days and would often leave them in the dark in their rooms. Quite often, patients would be found dead due to neglect days after they actually died. Basically, if Dr. Paulo had no interest in performing experiments on a patient, that patient was left uncared for days. Often, the neglected ones were the ones who had only minor mental issues. In other words, the more mentally ill a patient was, the more cared for he was, while those who were in much better mental state were left hungry in the darkness for days. Many of the patients who died were buried in unmarked graves on the island. At the time, it was well known that those who were sent to the Poveglia Asylum were sent to die. Not only did Poveglia become a nightmarish place like during the years of the Black Death, it ironically became a death sentence for those who were sent there, just like during the years of the Black Death. Sometime in the 1930s, Dr. Paulo, who carried these experiments, was found dead near the bell tower located on the island. It was believed that he himself went mad and jumped to his death from the tower. Apart from that, the death toll of the patients was in the hundreds, and the conditions on many buildings were so bad that some have already started to fall apart while still being used by the asylum. 1968. The asylum was closed, and the island was abandoned again, and the buildings were left to decay and fall apart. Regardless of Poveglia's dark history, the government sold the island for €513,000 to a businessman who was planning to invest €20 million in a restoration plan. However, the plan was cancelled because the restoration project did not meet all the conditions. Other sources suggested that the sale was cancelled because the sell price was too low. The island became a hotspot for many paranormal investigators, and many of those who visited the island to investigate it for paranormal occurrences would often have terrifying experiences. 2015. A private group tried to raise 25 to 30 million euros for a new plan to include a public park, a restaurant, a hostel, and a study center. However, that plan was also cancelled. The island still remains abandoned, submerged in darkness, visited sometimes by paranormal enthusiasts and those who are interested in its horrible history. Paranormal investigators claim that they can sometimes smell burning flesh on the island. Others believe that the ghost of Dr. Paulo still haunts the island, and many claim to have heard the screams of the deceased patients.